My name is Amy Blau. Dara Virks and I are going to be presenting on our aspects of this Islandora 8 migration project. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of context and scope of our presentation. Dara, if you want to move to the first slide. So around February of 2020, Lyrasis was looking for partners and pilot sites for their IMLS grant to test and document migration paths from Fedora 3 to Fedora 6, and they wanted to include an Islandora site as part of this. And so based on the size and scope of Whitman College's repository, they determined we were a good fit as a pilot site. And Born-Digital, who is one of the grant partners, is also our current and sort of ongoing Islandora site vendor. So that also made from some nice synchronicity and good sort of overlap of knowledge. The grant was funded and we started the pilot project at the end of September 2020. So next slide. So as we were working on this project, one of the first things we did was to sort of specify functional requirements for our new Islandora 8 site. And we drew very heavily on our current Islandora 7 site, in which we have scholarly content and archives digital collections. They use a wide range of content models, including newspaper, including thesis, including oral history. We also wanted to take advantage of some of the new Islandora 8 affordances, such as linked agents. And so in this presentation, we're going to talk about how the theming and site configuration were set up to accommodate all of our digital objects, and how we made changes to our metadata spreadsheet so that this configuration would be accurately reflected on ingest via Islandora Workbench. So this is not the entire migration. This is just that particular aspect of the migration that we're going to be able to cover in this presentation. And now I'm going to hand it over to Dara to continue.
So this was really the first opportunity for us to take our base theme and customize it for a particular client according to their needs and their metadata. So the first step was we reviewed a representative sample set of metadata that Amy's team provided, and we gave to them a couple of questionnaires that related to colors, font, logo, other branding things, how they wanted their search results and collection teaser text to look, and also what fields they wanted to use for facets, and also what fields they wanted to use on the object pages. And then as part of our review of the sample set of metadata, we also made recommendations about custom fields they might want to add, or custom taxonomies, things that weren't represented in the default fields. And then based on reviewing the sample metadata, we updated the default repository item content type. We added a few text, link, and entity reference fields. We added a custom role to the relators list in the linked agent field. And we also, based on the questionnaires that the Whitman team filled out, we updated the Solar Search content view to add, to change which fields were going to be used. We did have to change the field used for the date sort dropdown. We added the facets that they wanted to use. And we also did configuration to the facets in a separate facets configuration page. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how our theme works with Islandora. We have several different display modes that determine how objects appear. We also use the Islandora object metadata view to as part of our compound object display. And for each display, we can enable or disable certain fields. We can add custom fields. We can rearrange them. And the display modes are triggered based on a combination of resource type, Islandora model, and Islandora display terms, which are also tied to contexts. And then we use the display hints field, which is related to the Islandora display taxonomy. So for our purposes, the resource type really defines the type of object using DC and Library of Congress terms. The model taxonomy really isn't necessarily metadata related. It's more defining how the object's going to be displayed. So that's kind of how we differentiate between those two, because they're kind of similar. And then this is just a chart showing how we use combinations of the resource type, Islandora model, and Islandora display terms to get the different display modes. So what Amy's team did is made sure that in their metadata, they were using the correct resource type, model, and display term according to how they wanted the object to look. And then that became part of the metadata that was ingested. So they had, the Whitman team had a couple of special display concerns around, particularly for oral histories. They wanted to display audio files and transcripts. They also had binary, like a group of binary files that they wanted to show. So we updated our compound object display to accommodate various media types. And I have an example here of an audio and transcript compound object. And then there's an example below it from Whitman's site, just using some sample thumbnail images. But this is how groups of binary objects were displayed. And so sort of as an interim solution for the oral histories, they've created compound objects that use audio files and transcript documents. And we have an example on the next slide of those, of one of those. Newspapers was another important content model that we needed to accommodate. So our theme has a newspaper parent view that is very similar to what was in Islandora 7. So this is an example of the parent view, which divides the issues up by year, month, and then the issue itself. And we had to come up with another interim solution here because we don't have the IA book reader in Islandora 8 right now. And it was really important to be able to search within issues. So what we did was we used the PDF of the newspaper issue on the issue display. And then you can search in PDF.js, you have the little search icon that enables you to search within that PDF. And then the pages themselves, if you can see the little pages tab up there, you can click there to go to a particular page and see a high-res image of each page. So the top here shows the pages view with thumbnails of each page, and you can click on one of those and you get to the high-res image of the page. And then there's also the OCR tab there too, which doesn't display in a pretty way, but it's there. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Amy to talk about a little bit about what they did for their metadata preparation, taking into consideration what our theme needs to have.
Right. So how we're actually running this migration, which is sort of currently in progress. We're using the Islandora workbench that Mark Jordan is developing. And so all of our metadata is in Google Sheets, and we've been making changes to those sheets. So we had had spreadsheets from our initial migration into Islandora 7. So we've been maintaining a lot of metadata in these spreadsheets, which I know that not everybody does in quite the same way. But because we had it in spreadsheets, it made a lot of sense to sort of use that to get our metadata in and to make the changes we needed to. So some of these changes, We've included, you can see here, we have a field model, which includes that information that Dara had talked about, sort of specifying how this is going to look more or less. It sort of lines up with content model. We have a mapping that kind of helps us to figure out which one to use based on what Islandora 7 content model it was. And then the field resource type, the headings cut off a little there, so that's in there as well. The other thing you can see in this particular excerpt is the field display hints over on the left. And that is just for anything that's going to be using the PDF viewer or the OpenSeaDragon image viewer. We indicate that so that that information is going in on ingest and sort of streamlining how things look. We don't have to go in and set things up by hand. Things like the audio and the video viewers don't take something in that display hint, and obviously the collections don't have that either. Our collections are repository items, unlike in Bethany's display. So that's sort of how things are looking as we prepare all of that metadata to be pulled in together with our objects. And I can just explain briefly in the last slide. So for linked agents, what we decided to do, and I couldn't quite tell from Bethany's slides if they've done this a different way, that's something maybe could come up. There is no book viewer in Islandora 8 yet. It doesn't exist for Islandora 8. So that's why we're not using it. We would be very happy to use it. Sorry, that was a question in the chat. So for the linked agents, we had separate columns for sort of all of the different categories of persons or departments that were associated with the creation of an object. So we had a column for advisor, we had a column for author, we had a column for, in other cases, publisher, contributor, department here for our theses. And so what you can see in the sort of little extract below is that we have a single field linked agent, that's containing all of these individual names, and they're preceded by a prefix that indicates what kind of relator that is. And you can see that a couple of these are local. These are sort of specific to our collection because the standard list of relators doesn't include one for advisor and doesn't include one for a department. So we had put that in. That was sort of, and so this is really kind of the outcome of working with Born-Digital on what these configurations look like, got us to a place where we were really ready to set up all of our metadata to be ingested so that we can, again, take advantage of some of the affordances of Islandora 8 so that we can ensure that it's displaying the way that we intend it to. And work is still in progress, but we do have a staging site with some items up, which we potentially, I think, could give a little tour of if there's time. But that's pretty much, I think, what we wanted to give the overview of. So thank you for this. I'm happy to, so I saw some questions coming through about book viewers. Just a second here. So why not consider OpenSeaDragon to be a book viewer? Yeah, the problem with OpenSeaDragon is, as Jordan said, that we don't have the capability to really sort of use that HOCR to locate search results on a particular page. It does work, right? You can have your paged items and look at each page and go. It certainly functions, but it doesn't have that nice ability to give you the little drop arrow indicating which page things are on, or to highlight the term on the page. And for our use case, it's important that we be able to have that highlighting on the page so that people are able to find the term right there. So for us, it's more useful to be able to have the newspaper pages show up in the PDF viewer, because within the PDF viewer, if your PDF is OCR'd, you can have those search terms show up on the page.
Amy, did you want to talk about importing the existing extracted text files too at all? Or not?
Well, I mean, we're trying that too. It's kind of confusing because we do have existing OCR extracted tests for the newspapers for like each page. And we have successfully, where we is Alan Stanley, who's also part of one of our pilot partners, is able to pull that over. So you can pull that over with your image that you're using with the OpenSeaDragon viewer and run a search on that. And if you do that, you'll get a result for an individual page. The problem is that currently that HOCR part where you highlight it on the page for that image just isn't there yet. So we do have the capability to do that. And we're planning right now on pulling that over so that we have it, because the idea is when a book viewer is available, we could then swap it out. My understanding is that there's going to be a Mirador book viewer that would be able to do some of these other functionality that the Internet Archive book viewer can do. So our hope is that if we pull over all of these files, I mean, that's why we're not just pulling over a PDF and slapping it up there. Our hope is if we pull over all these files, we can impose a new viewer on them and have a relatively seamless transition into a book viewer functionality. If our objects metadata were in mods, did you keep it there or did you keep it in Drupal? Well, our object metadata was in mods in 7 in Fedora, but we had it in spreadsheets to get it into that mods. And so the migration of the metadata files themselves were actually kind of sidestepping the process of like pulling it out of 7 and putting it into 8. There's been a lot of, I don't know if Paige is still on the call at some point, you know, if we get into the weeds of the metadata work, I might need to ask my colleague, our metadata librarian, to help me out. But basically, we did do some mapping to get from the mods to RDF, but the format our metadata had been in, so in the system it was in mods, but we still had these spreadsheets that we had used to populate our initial Islandora 7 instance, and those were, you know, columns with headers in the spreadsheets. And so in some ways it's easier. You can just sort of change your column names, and as long as they then map in the right way in the new system, you maybe don't have quite the same process of kind of manipulating the mods into the RDF because you're sort of working from the spreadsheet. I will defer to Paige's expertise on that, but that's pretty much what the idea was in terms of partly why we were using the spreadsheets at all. I mean, we wanted to take advantage of, in some testing, our partners really liked the way that the Islandora workbench was working, and it let us do a lot of that metadata work ourselves. So that's kind of why we were there. Let's see. Paige, since you're on the call, is there anything else you wanted to say about our process of getting the metadata in and out?
I think that, yeah, what you said was basically it. We did end up mapping our mods to RDF, and we based it off of the Islandora metadata interest groups work. And what their work did is that they looked at Islandora 8 defaults and their mods, and they essentially did a mods to RDF mapping. And so because how we ingested, we did do spreadsheets, so that like RDF mapping was kind of a bonus. but there is stuff available out there. But like you said, Amy, we mostly did spreadsheets, and the RDF kind of wasn't as important. But yeah.
And the question of if we're happy with I-8 and sort of what the advantages are, I mean, since Islandora 7's end of life, right, we knew we needed to move, and the grant was a fantastic opportunity to really to make that move with a lot of really dedicated support. It's been a really good experience working with folks on this grant, and I think we've all learned a lot about this process, and there's going to be a lot of documentation coming out of that that should be helpful for folks who are planning on making that move as well. There are a lot of differences, and there are some things, I mean, as we mentioned in the presentation, as we mentioned, some things that aren't quite exactly the same, or at least not exactly the same yet. And so, you know, the way we're dealing with our newspapers right now is a little bit of a temporary thing until we have figured out a way to more effectively do the viewer. For the oral histories, it's also a temporary thing until we figure out how to effectively incorporate the VTT tech capabilities, which, as I understand it, are, you know, exist, but we just haven't had the time to apply those to our collections yet. We do like the way that some of the taxonomy functionality is working. We do like some of the ways that linked agents let you move from link from one object to another and sort of really make sure your information is standardized. There's some search sorting capabilities that we're really excited about. We're not done with this migration yet, right? This migration is really underway right now. And so we're still sort of seeing what it's going to end up looking like, but we're pretty convinced that it's going to be a very functional and attractive site. So we're just sort of still working out some of the kinks. Someone had asked about the size of collections. Well, I think we have a couple of terabytes that we're going to be moving. It's not small because we've got a lot of tips and we've got a lot of newspapers. We don't have a huge number of items, but we have some large ones. But we have not actually moved. So far, we've done a lot of testing and some sample collections, but we're still sort of early in the process of actually moving all of our items over. So that's something that we're still doing some benchmarking on, and as part of the grant reporting out, there'll probably be some more information coming out about how resource intensive that is as well.
And in terms of Mirador, that's definitely something that's on our roadmap to integrate into our theme and our base install. We just don't have it as an option for display right now, but I think that that's probably going to be the best replacement for the IA book reader. And my understanding is it will allow for the highlighting. I don't know about the page flipping though.
Yeah, people really like the page flipping. So I don't know. I think that there's a lot of discussion, or certainly I think there's discussion in the Islandora communities about, you know, how to bring that functionality, how to move that forward. If there's a lot of people who want it, they're, you know, part of this is deciding this is really important and who's going to be able to spend the time to make that happen. I mean, I'm sure it's a question of how much time developers can spend on it. So it's just going to be a question of where that happens within an open source structure. So yeah, but there are, I think we found a very effective workflow that is going to work for us until such time as we can really have that additional functionality back. So I think that was really reassuring to us, that even though 100% exact way of doing it wasn't available to us yet, we have an effective interim solution, and it should be hopefully pretty easy to change the viewer. So I think we're feeling pretty confident that we're going to have a very functional repository site that's going to look good, and we're going to be able to sort of incrementally introduce those aspects that aren't quite done yet, because we're still on the early stages of some of these migrations. Not quite the pioneers of ASU and UNLV, but still on that front end. So
yeah, that is the really cool thing about Islandora 8, is that it is really easy to switch the viewer. Like once we have a Mirador up and working, and it's a matter of switching the term basically for the display hint, and it'll be you'll be able to use a different viewer once you have all those records in there. Did you want to show the site, Amy?
yeah, we can show the site if people, we've got a few minutes left if people want to look at it. Again, this is, if we show the staging site, it's still got some, I guess some warts, right? Like it's not a production site, and our production site is just sort of starting to get some things loaded into it, and doesn't really have the range of features. But should I share my screen? Do you want to show it, Dara? What's the best way to do it?
Why don't you go ahead, because you might know what you want to.
Okay.
I will make you a co-host as well.
Thank you. Sorry. I should have probably just. Okay.
Did that work for you?
Yep.
Beautiful.
So what you're seeing now should be one of our pages of the paper, and you can see it's on the PDF viewer, so it's a scrolling. So it's true, you don't have that really nice, oh, it didn't quite load yet. You don't have that really nice flip mode that lets you sort of look at it in its original format. But what you do have that we had really wanted was, I forget is. So you have the ability to really highlight your terms, and where are they? There we go. So that's our favorite search term for searching in our college newspaper is the student government abbreviation. And so this way, if you do a search across our whole collection, you can see it shows up in lots of places. It's showing up a number of times in the same issue. Because this is a test collection, I think the same issue was inserted more than once. So, but when you go to it, you do need to run the search a second time to find it in the document. This is sort of the stopgap interim part, right? Like once we're able to implement a viewer that uses the HOCR, it'll just be one-stop shopping. But that's sort of what we're looking at there. The other thing people might find interesting, we can go back and look at the sort of multi-type compound objects. So compound objects, we've got a couple different things going on. So if you have a compound object, we do have it so that it displays, it's loading slowly, it displays all of the children. And so you can click on the children from the parent viewer. But if you go to our this is the example that we gave in the slides. We have our audio player, and then we have a transcript that you can view and download. You can't view it at the same time in the same viewer. That's why we're going to want to implement the VTT functionality. We just haven't had the capacity to do that yet. And so until that's done, this is our closest capability there. And we have a number of objects like that. We also have creator as a facet. So that is, it's a linked agent that we've sort of pulled out as a facet separate from other creator other relator terms is what I want to say. We're using genre to organize. So our facets are, we're pretty happy with the facets that we have. And I don't know, what else should I show folks? Is there something else folks want to see in the site?
I've got an eye on the chat as well in case anyone wants to add some suggestions there.
We have a very small subset of our theses right now. And again, we have to fix our thumbnails. They've gone a little wonky. Again, this is just the staging test site and not ready for everything. But again, you can see that our creator and department show up. And right now for this one, we don't have the PDF view turned on, but our metadata is showing up. You can see our creator, advisor, department.
We do have one question asking about your experience with Islandora Workbench in terms of performance, given the large amounts of data and files that are being migrated.
Yeah, I'm frankly probably not the best person to answer that question because I'm really project managing from the Whitman standpoint, and Alan Stanley is the person who's really doing most of the work of getting our stuff into our sites using Workbench. Thus far, I think he's had a pretty good experience, but this is just with sort of sample collections. So we're really going to find out soon as we start trying to pull our newspapers in how this is holding up. I think using Workbench is less of the question than we're sort of pulling in a number of files sort of from our old site across the web, as opposed to sort of mounting them on the server and pulling them in, unless that proves to be so time intensive that we have to put them all on the server. So we're trying to sort of collect some of that information about kind of how long it takes and how hard it's working with Islandora Workbench to pull things in. And hopefully by the time we're finished doing all of the migration work, we should have more information to report out on that as part of the grant. So I think at this point, what I would say is Alan has been very happy working with Workbench thus far, but we've been using much smaller subsets of our data so far. And so we're really gonna, the proof will be in the pudding as we pull everything over into our production site.